In a bustling military training camp, the air was thick with the sounds of boots hitting the ground and the sharp commands of drill sergeants. Among the sea of fresh recruits was Clara, a simple woman from a small town. She had always dreamed of serving her country, but her journey had been anything but ordinary. Clara bore scars, both visible and invisible, from a past that shaped her into the person she was today. Growing up, she had faced her share of challenges, including a serious accident that left her with lasting physical marks. Despite this, her spirit remained unbroken, and she was determined to prove herself in the military. The day began with a rigorous physical training session. Clara pushed herself to keep up with the younger recruits, but whispers followed her like shadows. "Look at her scars," one recruit snickered, loud enough for others to hear. "What's she doing here?" Clara felt the sting of their words, but she held her head high, focusing on her training. As the days passed, the taunts continued, but she refused to let them deter her. She was there for a purpose, and she was determined to succeed. The turning point one afternoon. The recruits gathered for a briefing led by General Thompson, a respected figure known for his no-nonsense attitude. As he entered the room, a hush fell over the recruits. Clara felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. She had heard stories about the general's sharp eye for talent and his commitment to recognizing those who truly belonged in the ranks. As the briefing began, General Thompson started calling out recruits to assign them their call signs. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Clara listened intently as names were called. Each one met with cheers and laughter from the group. Then, to her surprise, the general paused and looked directly at her. "Clara," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "Your call sign will be Scarlet." The room fell silent. Clara's heart raced. The nickname was a nod to her scars, a symbol of her resilience and strength. For a moment she froze, grappling with the weight of his words. She had expected mockery, not recognition, embracing strength as. The initial shock faded. Clara felt a rush of emotions. The general continued. "Every scar tells a story of survival and courage. You face challenges that many haven't, and that makes you stronger than most. Wear it with pride, Scarlet." The recruits, who had once mocked her, now looked at her with a different perspective. The general's words transformed the narrative, turning what had been a source of shame into a badge of honor. Clara felt a surge of empowerment wash over her. From that day on, she embraced her call sign, using it as a reminder of her journey and strength. The taunts of her fellow recruits faded into the background as she proved herself during training exercises, showing them that she was just as capable, if not more so, than anyone else. Building bonds as the weeks passed, Clara formed bonds with her fellow recruits, who began to admire her tenacity and spirit. They sought her out for advice and training tips, and the camaraderie that developed helped her feel more at home. One evening, as they sat around a campfire after a long day of training, Clara shared her story, the accident, her scars, and how she had come to embrace them. Her honesty resonated with the group, and they began to open up about their own struggles. In that moment, the once judgmental recruits became allies. They cheered for each other, creating a supportive environment where everyone could thrive. Clara had not only earned their respect, but had also forged lasting friendships. The graduation months later, as they prepared for graduation, Clara stood proudly in her uniform, her call sign emblazoned on her chest. General Thompson addressed the graduating class, highlighting individual achievements and resilience. When he reached Clara, he spoke not just of her physical strength, but of her character. "Scarlet embodies what it means to be a soldier," he declared. "She reminds us that our scars, whether seen or unseen, are a testament to our journeys, and they should be celebrated." As the crowd erupted in applause, Clara felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had transformed from a simple woman mocked for her scars into a symbol of strength and determination. Conclusion, walking across the stage to receive her certificate, Clara realized that her journey had just begun. She had turned her vulnerabilities into strengths and had inspired others to embrace their own stories. From that day forward, she vowed to honor her past while looking forward to a future filled with purpose and service. With her head held high and a smile on her face, Clara, now known as Scarlet, had found her place in the world, proving that true strength lies not in perfection, but in resilience and courage. Clara had always dreamed of serving her country. Growing up in a small town, she often watched military parades, feeling a swell of pride as she saw soldiers in their crisp uniforms marching in formation. Inspired by stories of bravery and sacrifice, she decided to enlist after high school. However, life had thrown her a curveball. An accident during her senior year left her with scars that would forever mark her skin and her soul. Despite the pain and the self-doubt that crept in as she healed, Clara's determination never wavered. She spent months preparing for basic training, running every morning and practicing drills. The day she received her acceptance letter was one of the happiest moments of her life. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, a chance to prove herself. Chapter 2. Arrival at the camp. Upon arriving at the military training camp, Clara was filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The camp buzzed with energy, recruits bustling about, some laughing and others shouting commands. She felt a sense of belonging wash over her, but it was quickly overshadowed by the whispers that followed her. As she stood in formation with the other recruits, she overheard snippets of conversations. "Look at her scars," one recruit sneered. "What's she doing here?" The words pierced through her, igniting a familiar sense of shame that she had tried so hard to bury. Chapter 3. The First Challenge. The first few weeks were grueling. Physical training pushed her to her limits, and the mental demands of military life were equally challenging. Clara struggled to keep up with her peers, but she refused to give in. Each morning she rose early, determined to improve. Despite her efforts, the teasing continued. One particularly harsh recruit, a tall, muscular man named Ryan, made it his mission to mock her. "Scarface!" he called out during a drill, eliciting laughter from others. Clara's heart sank, but she held her head high, reminding herself of why she was there. Chapter 4. A moment of vulnerability. One night, after an especially tough day of training, Clara sat alone in her bunk, feeling defeated. She unwrapped the bandages around her scars, tracing the lines with her fingers. Each scar told a story of survival, of resilience. But in that moment, they felt like reminders of her inadequacy. Suddenly, her fellow recruits, noticing her isolation, began to gather around her bunk. They shared their own stories of loss, of pain, and of dreams deferred. Clara listened, feeling the weight of their experiences resonate with her. Sharing their vulnerabilities created a bond that slowly began to shift the dynamics within the group. Chapter 5. The General's Arrival. Day General Thompson arrived for a briefing was one Clara had been anticipating. His reputation preceded him. He was known for his no-nonsense approach and his ability to recognize true potential. As he entered the room, the atmosphere shifted, and the recruits stood at attention, eager to impress. During the briefing, General Thompson spoke about the importance of resilience and teamwork. Clara hung on his every word, feeling inspired. "Every one of you has a story," the general said, looking around the room. "And those stories will make you stronger soldiers." Chapter 6. The call sign. When the time came for call signs, Clara felt a blend of excitement and dread. Each recruit was called forward, and as the general assigned names, she listened intently. Ryan's call sign, Tank, elicited cheers. He basked in the attention, reveling in his perceived superiority. Then, the moment came. "Clara!" General Thompson called, his gaze piercing through the crowd. "Your call sign will be Scarlet." Silence enveloped the room. Clara froze, her heart racing. Scarlet was a play on her scars, but it felt strangely empowering. The general continued, "Your scars are not a sign of weakness. They are a testament to your strength and resilience." Chapter 7. Embracing the change in that moment, the tide began to turn. Clara felt the weight of the general's words lift her spirits. The recruits who had once mocked her now looked at her with newfound respect. Scarlet became more than just a name. It symbolized her journey and her courage. As the days passed, Clara embraced her call sign, using it as motivation to push harder in training. The camaraderie among the recruits grew, and soon they began to rely on each other. Ryan, realizing he was no longer a figure to be feared, began to respect Clara's determination. Chapter 8. Building a team as. Clara continued to prove herself. She found herself becoming a mentor to other recruits struggling with their self-doubts. She organized training sessions where they could practice together, fostering a supportive environment. The bond among the group deepened, and they began to function as a cohesive unit. One evening, while sitting around a campfire, Clara shared her story with the group. She spoke of her accident and the scars that had once made her feel ashamed. "But they also remind me of my strength," she said, her voice steady. "We all have our battles, and it's how we face them. We all have our battles, and it's how we face them. The air in the mess hall of Fort Bragg was a thick blend of chlorine, gravy, and the barely contained tension of hundreds of young recruits. Eliza Ma Jenkins stood by the serving line, ladle in hand. She was a simple woman, stout, with a kind face framed by tightly braided gray hair, and she wore a permanently stained apron over her crisp white uniform. But it was her hands and the exposed skin of her forearms that drew the most attention and the most cruel of remarks. They were a road map of mottled pink and silver tissue, a tapestry of old, deep-burn scars. "Hey, look at those claws," whispered Private Miller, a fresh-faced, overly confident recruit from a wealthy family, nudging the man next to him. "You'd think they'd at least make the kitchen staff cover up those things. Looks like she fell into a fryer." He let out a snicker, loud enough to turn a few heads. Eliza heard him. She always did. Her eyes didn't meet his. They simply flicked down to her scars for a brief, familiar moment of introspection. Then, she scooped a generous pile of mashed potatoes onto the next tray and moved on. The sting of the mockery was a dull ache she'd learned to live with. The general's entrance. The atmosphere in the mess hall snapped to attention as a commotion began at the entrance. General Marcus Thorne, the commander of the entire 68th Airborne Corps, and a man legendary for both his brilliance and his terrifyingly high standards, strode in. He wasn't there for an inspection. This was a rare, informal visit. General Thorne moved through the hall like a hawk, nodding to a few officers, his eyes missing nothing. The recruits, including Private Miller, were statues of immaculate posture and silence. Then, the general stopped. He wasn't at a table. He was standing directly in front of the serving line, his gaze fixed not on a commissioned officer, but on Eliza. A hush fell over the entire room, so profound you could hear the clink of a fork hitting a plate across the hall. The general gave a crisp, formal salute, a gesture that stunned the hundreds of soldiers present. Eliza, flustered, instinctively dipped her head. "General, sir, welcome." General Thorne didn't acknowledge her greeting. Instead, his stern, uncompromising face cracked into a ghost of a smile. He leaned slightly closer and, his voice cutting clearly through the silence of the mess hall, spoke a single cryptic word. "Good to see you, Phoenix." The Freeze Private Miller, who had been watching the scene with smug curiosity, instantly felt the blood drain from his face. His confident smirk froze, replaced by a look of pure, agonizing horror. Phoenix. It wasn't just a generic call sign. Everyone in the army knew of the legendary, near-mythical Phoenix. She was the combat medic whose actions during a devastating mortar strike in Kandahar had saved the lives of a dozen men, including the then Colonel Thorne. The mortars had hit their field hospital, incinerating everything. The medic, already severely wounded, had pulled soldiers from the burning wreckage, repeatedly running back into the inferno until she collapsed. She was credited with keeping vital command intel safe and saving more lives than any living soldier could boast. Her injuries, the official reports noted, were extensive. 3rd and 4th degree burns across her arms and hands. She had been medically retired with full honors, and her identity was kept intentionally vague to protect her privacy. The general placed an arm on Eliza's shoulder, his tone now warm and deeply respectful. "Phoenix, you always did know how to make a decent pot of coffee." But I hear your meatloaf is even better these days. Eliza, or rather, Phoenix, smiled, a genuine, powerful smile that wiped away all traces of the simple cook. General, you'll find the meatloaf recipe is classified, but I think you'll approve of the gravy. It's on the house, General Thorne chuckled, shaking his head. I wouldn't have it any other way, Sergeant Major. He took the plate she offered him and moved to sit, but not before giving the stunned room a single, cold glance. Private Miller stood there, motionless, his spine locked in fear. He hadn't mocked a simple cook's scars. He had mocked a decorated war hero, a woman who had literally emerged from the fire, a phoenix, and whose life had been dedicated to service. And he had done it right in front of the man whose life she had saved. The silence of the mess hall was now heavy with judgment. Private Miller knew, with sickening certainty, that his future in the military had just gotten infinitely and deservedly harder. The simple woman's call sign was a word that spoke louder than any medal. Private Miller remained frozen, his face a sickening mix of shame and terror. The murmuring silence that had fallen over the mess hall felt heavier than any punishment. As General Thorne finished his meal with Ma Jenkins, now revealed as the legendary Sergeant Major Phoenix, a woman whose scars were badges of unbelievable courage, the recruits were dismissed. The recruits reckoning outside, under the blistering Texas sun, Private Miller stood stiffly with his squad. The general's black sedan hadn't even pulled away when a large shadow fell over Miller. It was Sergeant First Class Ramirez, Miller's usually good-natured drill instructor, and his face was granite. Private Miller! Ramirez's voice was a low growl that carried far more danger than a shout. Sir! Yes, Sergeant! Miller snapped to attention, already anticipating the worst. You have a detail, Private. A personal detail from the general himself. Ramirez leaned in close, his voice a lethal whisper. The general called the commander of this post personally. He didn't ask for a court-martial. He didn't ask for extra duty. He simply asked that you be given a special educational assignment. Effective immediately, Miller swallowed hard. Sir, what is the assignment? Ramirez gave a humorless smile. You're assigned to the mess hall for the rest of the month, Private. Not to eat, but to clean. The meaning of Scars Miller's stomach dropped. Mess hall duty was grueling, mind-numbing labor, but the next part was the true punishment. And Private? Ramirez continued, his eyes meeting Miller's with chilling seriousness. Your specific daily task, before sunrise and after sunset, is to ensure Sergeant Major Jenkins's kitchen and office are spotless. You are to take all your orders directly from her. Ramirez stepped back. Do you understand your assignment, Private? Sir, yes, Sergeant. Understood. Miller marched toward the mess hall, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. He saw Ma Jenkins at a service window, calmly wiping it down. She wasn't wearing her apron anymore. In her crisp white undershirt, the intricate, terrible map of her burn scars was fully visible on her arms. He stopped 2 paces from the window, snapped the sharpest salute of his young career, and said, his voice surprisingly steady, Sergeant Major Jenkins, Private Miller reporting for duty. Ma'am. Phoenix turned and looked at him. There was no anger, no triumph, only a quiet, deep clarity in her eyes. Welcome, Private, she said softly. Grab a mop. And while you work, maybe you can start learning the difference between a weakness and a testament. Private Miller spent the next 30 days scrubbing grease and learning humility from a woman whose scars represented more courage than he could yet imagine. It was the hardest and ultimately the most important lesson of his training. Do you want to see what happens to Private Miller after his month of duty? Or maybe a flashback scene that shows how Eliza earned her call sign